Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. So, a couple summers ago, it occurred to me that I really didn't know much of Paul McCartney's solo career. So at the beginning of undergrad, I got really into George because at the time I thought it was this indie niche discovery that George also sang and wrote songs. It wasn't just John and Paul. And of course I knew, a fair few of John's songs because he was the most political of the Beatles. He of course wrote Imagine, and of course he was assassinated. So John had the iconic solo career, and then George just had this wonderful sound that magically resonated with me once I discovered it. Like, what is life? What a sound in that song. But I kept thinking, one of these days you should listen to solo Paul. And I heard a snippet of the song, Maybe I'm Amazed, and I figured, okay, I'm going to buy a Paul McCartney album finally, and it's going to be McCartney, his first solo album. The problem with that one is that outside of Maybe I'm Amazed, and even a bit with Maybe I'm Amazed, they kind of sound like rough drafts, like a lot of instrumental stuff, a lot of very simple stuff, a lot of very mumbly singing. Outside of that one song, the rest of the CD didn't do that much for me. And I guess after that, I just kind of stopped thinking about Paul for a while. But then recently I discovered this YouTube channel by a guy called Elliot Roberts. He did a great analysis of one of my favorite biopics, Love and Mercy, the Brian Wilson biopic about why, so many biopics seem so annoying and generic, but that one was so great. And he also does a lot of great analysis on Beatles media. And one day I decided to brave it and watch his 2-hour video ranking every single album Paul McCartney made. And at the very top of his list was this album, Ram. Now, this same day I went to Sonic Boom Records store at Spadina and Dundas in Toronto to buy my copy of McCartney. I was flipping through the selections and I saw Ram, and I figured, this has my favorite cover art of all these, and I really like cover art, but don't judge a book by its cover. And after McCartney didn't really work out for me as a record, I kind of figured Ram is going to be the same. I'm all excited about Paul playing with this animal here and these funky colors, but it's going to be a real disappointment. But spoiler alert, Elliot Roberts ranked the Ram album atop of everything that Paul McCartney had ever made. And he also had the separate video on how Ram invented the indie pop genre. So Elliot Roberts' commentary convinced me I had to give Ram a try. And though it was a bit weird at first, it quickly settled in as possibly the favorite album I've discovered all of this year. So the first track on the record is Too Many People. It starts out with kind of an echoey, weird vocal, almost something from the previous McCartney record, and then you start to hear some normal singing as well as some shouty backups. It's almost like Paul McCartney's version of Give Peace a Chance. And one of the things that people observed with the song at this time of the release is that it was kind of seen as a diss track to John Lennon. My sense from looking at the bit of the history is Paul was kind of hostile with the rest of the Beatles at the time. He was perceived as the one who had broken up the group. So lyrics like too many people preaching practices, you got your lucky break and broke it in two, those are seen as knocks on John Lennon. Even as this song is in a way a tribute to John Lennon because it sounds a lot like Give Peace a Chance. Track number 2 is called 3 Legs. This is a bluesy song, and you can hear some call and response vocals with Linda McCartney, and it makes it, despite being blues, also just kind of sound like a cute children's song. The other Beatles also heard this one as a dig at them, and for me it's kind of a Rorschach test. Once you hear the thing about it being a dig at the other Beatles, it feels really obvious, but otherwise you just hear this cute little children's song. When I thought you was my friend, but you let me down, my heart around the bend. A fly flies out. Most flies got 3 legs, but mine got 1. So 3 and 1 for breaking up. If you look at those lyrics thinking they're about the Beatles breaking up, they very much look like that, but otherwise it just sounds like a silly folk song about a fly. Track number 3 is called Ram On. So this one is played on a ukulele in a minor key. Kind of sounds like a song someone in a movie scene might sing up to the moon. I don't know if Ram On is really much of anything as an expression, but I guess it meant something to Paul, and great, you have a song that goes with the cover photo. This is one of those songs where just because Paul's so into it, you don't realize when you're listening to it how minimal it is. But when you actually look up the lyrics to the song, there are very few lyrics to it at all. But Paul just keeps the vibes going with this fun little ukulele song to the moon. Track number 4 is called Dear Boy. And like the previous song, Ram On, it has a slight melancholy feel to it. But there's some repetitive backup singing that gives it a sort of upbeat quality to contrast with its melancholy quality. So Paul says this one was meant as a diss track for Linda's former lover. He said kind of like, I can't believe you got rid of this wonderful woman. But again, because of the context, John Lennon kind of heard it as a knock on him. Track 5 is where this album went from, okay, I'm kind of into it, to, this might be my favorite album that I've discovered this year. It's called Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey. So this might be a track where I looked at the back of the record and was put off, because if this is one of the most famous ones, it sounds too messy to be a good song. And indeed it is. It's Paul cutting and pasting these various incomplete songs, but the pieces eventually just get so good it doesn't matter that it's a kind of copy-paste hack job. So the name Uncle Albert, it's taken from an uncle that Paul had, and it kind of fits the theme of his granny songs from the Beatles days, like Your Mother Would Know. He's kind of saying, I'm so sorry to the previous generation if you feel us hippies aren't as proper as you are. We're sorry if we've disappointed you. But then he gets into the very silly Alice in Wonderland-esque little marine ditty, Admiral Halsey, where, you know, on the one hand, he was showing deference to the older generation and their propriety with Uncle Albert, but then he goes into the better part of the song and just starts mocking it. And then there's this absolutely catchy chorus, hands across the water, that John apparently actually liked in this album, and indeed Paul saw as kind of sounding like John. Track 6 on the record is Smile Away. This song makes use of kind of doo-wops in the background, but they have a kind of buzzy sound to them that makes them sound distinct, builds on that indie sound that Elliot Roberts observed Paul was really developing before indie as we know it now was really a term in the music industry. Paul brings all kinds of energy here using the lower part of his singing range, and the lyrics are just audible enough, even if they can be a bit muddy at times. You know, to follow up Uncle Albert, Admiral Halsey, we have another fairly catchy song. This song could also be a Beatles diss track, since he makes a weird comment about meeting a friend and smelling his breath, but I don't know. Track 7 is called Heart of the Country. Now, Paul's voice goes to the higher part of his range here. That's another great thing with this record. You're hearing all the characteristics in Paul's voice. He's not someone in the, you know, vein of Freddie Mercury or Roy Orbison or Elvis, where you hear him on one song or two and you think, wow, he's an amazing singer. But if you hear Paul over the course of an album, you really hear the strength of his voice. So Heart of the Country, it's a fairly folksy song about wanting to go live in the country. And this is one of the songs that people who don't like the record don't really like. John Landau of Rolling Stone kind of wrote about how this song felt hollow, you know, with its lyrics like a one horse, a one sheep, like Paul is just pretending to write country songs. Now, pretend country songs are certainly a thing. You hear them on a bunch of Rolling Stones records, but for me this doesn't ring hollow at all. This is the song of someone from Liverpool wanting that country life, and I think one of the things that appeals to me about the Ram album and this photo of Paul again bonding with an animal is he wanted to have this farm, he and Linda did, all the while that they were becoming vegetarian. So it's not, you know, an old-timey farm song, it's a new hippie kind of farm song, and I think it's great. Track number 8 is really weird, but it's up there with Admiral Halsey as the catchiest thing on this record. It's called Monkberry Moon Delight, and Paul, who you generally think of as having this very gentle voice, sounds very angry in the vocals here, but since the lyrics are so silly, obviously it's not real anger. It's, I don't know, a song about some sort of made-up sweet food, makes use of words that to the English ear sound silly, like cantata, and it's just, I don't know, it's a very passionate nursery rhyme feel to it. And just, if you're going to listen to one song from this record, again, either the Admiral Halsey or this one, because it it's both catchy and it has so much quirk and character to it. And for people who didn't like Paul at the time, and it seems like these rock critics at the time were really pretentious. I don't know if that stopped, but they didn't like the fact that, you know, Paul wasn't changing the world with his music, wasn't saying something profound. And I mean, there's so many rock musicians who don't do that. I mean, I think what's interesting about with Paul is that even when he didn't have something profound to say, he was doing something extremely creative, provocative, full of life, and still keeping in mind that it's important to be catchy. So it's really hard to understand in hindsight why this record was so controversial at the time of its release, or not controversial necessarily, but not liked by a lot of big rock critics. Now, track number 9 at Eat at Home. This one is one of the more liked tracks by people like John Lennon and the rock critics. I mean, it's basically a classic sounding rocker, though the little riff on it is just distinct enough. Not much going on here lyrically. I don't know. There's I guess a bit of innuendo going on. I don't like the innuendo because I think of some comments that Toronto Mayor Rob Ford made in a far more grotesque context. Look that up if you want to. Don't look it up if you don't want the song ruined. Track number 10 is called Long-Haired Lady. So this is one of the ones where we really hear Linda McCartney's backup singing, and she's sounding sort of really, not angry here, but, you know, like she's telling Paul off in a sort of loving, angry kind of way, and it contrasts to Paul's overly smooth voice. Well, 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 is this the only thing you want me for? It just has a wonderful, very funny sound to it. So this album, it's not actually a Paul McCartney album, it's a Paul and Linda McCartney album. She's credited as writing a bunch of the songs, and she does backup singing on it. Now, I don't know to what extent Linda was truly involved in the musical vision here. What I do know is that she made herself as a photographer who photographed a lot of musical subjects, and even before she had this particular close connection with the Beatles, she was really respected in the music industry for knowing the facts behind her subjects really well, making them comfortable when they were photographed. So she certainly had a connection to music going into this record, and I'd be curious whether it was kind of just a thing of love that she gets this equal credit, or whether there really is more to the story and this really is Paul and Linda's album. Track 11 is just a little bit of Ram On, that melancholy simple ukulele song we heard at the beginning. It's shorter. There's a minuscule song at the end about who's that girly girl. It kind of resembles what Paul did at the end of the I Will song on the White Album. And then finally, we get the epic conclusion, The Backseat of My Car, which might be the most mainstream pop on this album of sort of silliness and stripped down folk. But it's only barely the most mainstream thing on here. At times, Paul's voice is a bit mumbly. There are different musical parts, but overall, it just has this beautiful, soaring, stringed back chorus and is a great anthem for people adventuring out on the road. So, Paul McCartney's Ram, very pleasant surprise for me. And yeah, Elliot Roberts' recommendation of this one is stellar. And I guess I should listen to more Paul McCartney, but then again, apparently I started with the very best, so hopefully the rest is pretty close to it. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.